Hey guys, tonight we're slipping back into the hot and shimmering air of ancient Egypt, where one King Sneferu can't quite get comfortable, even in his own palace. You might imagine a pharaoh resting peacefully in a grand chamber lined with painted walls, incense burning, servants fanning him while music plays softly. But not tonight. Tonight, Sneferu is wide awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by thoughts of stone blocks heavier than elephants and the endless horizon of sand. He has visions of mountains of limestone stacked into perfect triangles, pointing toward eternity. He wants one of those mountains to carry his name forever. But you probably won't survive this story. Don't worry though, we'll drag you gently through it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing the mix of time zones drifting together like the Nile under moonlight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The king lies in his chamber in Dosha, a complex of reed mats, painted columns, and the faint smell of roasted barley drifting through from the kitchens. Outside, a chorus of night insects rises and falls, while a dog barks faintly in the workers' quarters. Sneferu's bed is piled with linen, soft enough by ancient standards, but nothing compared to your mattress. The problem isn't the bed, it's the noise in his mind. He is already replaying the day's council meeting. The tally of stone blocks cut from Tura's gleaming quarries, and the arguments of his architects who seem convinced that the angle of the pyramid is either too steep or too shallow. Historians still argue whether Sneferu himself sketched designs or simply hovered over his engineers. But every account agrees he was restless, almost obsessive about the details. It's not easy being the first king who wants not one but several pyramids. The earlier kings of Egypt, his predecessors, had started dabbling with step pyramids, like Djoser's famous one at Saqqara. Sneferu wants to outdo all of them. He wants smooth sides, not a staircase. He wants geometry so perfect that the gods themselves will look down and nod approvingly. And he wants it fast, because kings don't live forever, though in Egypt they tried to pretend they did. A servant pads into the room, barefoot, holding a small clay lamp that flickers shadows along the walls. He places a jug of water and a bowl of figs nearby, bows silently, and slips out again. Sneferu hardly notices. He's thinking about how tomorrow he'll have to send scribes to record the number of workers fit for heavy lifting. Tens of thousands have been rounded up farmers, working off taxes during the Nile's flood season. Artisans hoping for royal favor, prisoners with little choice. Feeding them all requires ships loaded with grain, onions, and beer arriving daily. And still they complain. Already rumors swirl that some men collapse in the heat, that the gods are displeased. Sneferu rubs his temples. What keeps him awake most of all is the vision of a pyramid collapsing under its own weight. The desert is cruel, but stone can be crueler. Limestone slabs don't forgive mistakes. He's heard whispers from his own master builders that if they angle the sides too sharply, the pyramid could split and slide, like sand tumbling from a child's hand. Imagine being a god-king, and the thing meant to immortalize you instead turns into a heap of rubble for jackals to climb. Not exactly the legacy you want. The king shifts on his bed, pulling the linen tighter. Somewhere in the distance, a flute begins to play a night watchman's attempt at staying awake, perhaps. Sneferu remembers his father's tomb, modest compared to what he envisions. He wants scale. He wants ambition written in stone. The stars themselves seem to mock him tonight, glittering in perfect alignment, while his architects squabble about degrees of slope. One of them even suggested aligning the pyramid not to the sun, but to the pole, an idea that sounded fringe even then. Historians still debate whether this was truly proposed, or whether later scribes invented the story to make sense of the bent pyramid's odd shape. Either way, it troubles him. Too many possibilities, too much room for error. He closes his eyes, tries to imagine the finished shape, for smooth faces meeting at a sharp point, glistening white in the sunlight. Travelers would see it from miles away, a beacon of power. Sailors on the Nile would glance up and whisper his name with awe. Priests would march in shadowed corridors deep within, chanting his divinity. But his mind drifts again to logistics. How many oxen will it take to drag a single block? What if a boat capsizes, bringing cedar logs from Byblus? He knows the Red Sea routes are dangerous, full of storms and unfriendly tribes. Even the Nile can betray him when it runs low. Sneferu sighs, his breath almost in rhythm with the desert wind that seeps through the shutters. He remembers visiting the quarries not long ago. The sunlight there was blinding, bouncing off the pale stone until your skin felt it could crack. Workers chipped endlessly, their tools sparking against the rock. One had shouted a joke about making an obelisk so tall it would scratch Ra-'s beard. The whole crew laughed, though the overseer quickly silenced them. Sneferu had smiled faintly, but deep down he wondered if the joke masked doubt. Was this all too big, too ambitious, too dangerous? Sometimes ambition is a heavy crown to wear. The hour stretches. A torch gutters outside in the corridor. The palace grows quieter. Even the dog has stopped barking. Somewhere, a priest murmurs a prayer for the king's health. Sneferu turns, stares at the ceiling beams. Will these beams outlast him? Probably not. They are wood, frail compared to stones. His pyramid, if he can ever get it right, will be eternal law, so he prays. Yet the thought lingers like a mosquito's whine. What if eternity collapses? By now, sleep should have claimed him. But kings don't always get to sleep. Their thrones may glitter, their crowns may shine, but the weight of stone keeps them awake. Tomorrow will bring another round of planning, another set of arguments, another tally of grain, oxen, and men. But tonight, here in the still air of Dosha, Sneferu wrestles with shadows, both his own and those cast by the flickering lamp. And while you lie here listening, maybe you're already drifting, your own thoughts blurring. while his remain sharp and restless. Morning slips across the desert like a pale gold sheet, warming the mud-brick walls of Dosha before anyone has quite stirred. Sneferu has barely slept. He sits now at a low wooden table, the surface darkened by oil lamps and sticky with last night's honey drips. Breakfast arrives the way it always does. A bowl of dates, bread still warm from the ovens, and a jug of beer so mild it's more like liquid bread. A servant hovers nearby, ready to peel fruit or pour water, but the king waves him off. What use is sweetness when your mind is crowded with calculations? He chews absently, his teeth grinding through the sticky flesh of dates, but his gaze is elsewhere. Already outside the palace, scribes are rolling out their papyrus sheets, tallying rations, scratching columns of numbers that will never quite add up the way he wants. To feed a pyramid's worth of laborers means harvesting whole fields, redirecting grain shipments meant for villagers, and calculating down to the onion. Each man expects his daily ration of bread, dried fish, garlic, and that beer. If even one link fails, if a boat overturns, if the granaries rot, if some official skims too much, then the whole project stutters. Sneferu knows this, and it chews at him more than the dates. He pauses to sip, watching steam coil from the bread. Historians still argue whether Egyptian pharaohs personally tasted their meals before court, or whether tasters took the first bite. Sneferu doesn't bother with such protocol. Poison isn't his worry. Logistics is. He has a whole machine to keep turning, and every morning meal is less about flavor than about keeping his body moving. The irony docenti escape him. Here is the lord of all the two lands, nibbling like a clerk over stale figs, muttering about supply chains. Across the courtyard, the sun climbs higher. Farmers, freed from their fields by the flood season, are funneling into the work camps. They shuffle in groups, carrying mats and jars, looking more like a festival crowd than a workforce, till the overseer's whips crack the morning air. Sneferu hears it faintly, muffled through the palace walls. His jaw tightens. Too much harshness, and the workers revolt. Too little, and blocks don't move. Finding that balance has become as much of an art as stacking limestone itself. One scribe enters, bowing low, and lays a scroll at the king's side. Sneferu unfurls it with sticky fingers. The neat hieratic script lists yesterday's deliveries. 10 barges of limestone from Tura to arriving cracked from poor mooring. 1 boat delayed on the Nile bend. Another column lists losses. 3 oxen dead from heat. Several men gone lame. 1 overseer dismissed for drunkenness. Sneferu sighs and pushes the bread away. How can he enjoy his meal when every bite tastes of delay? Still, the morning must continue. He wipes his hands on a linen cloth, calls for water, and rises. His sandals slap against the stone as he steps into the shaded hall. Priests await him there, murmuring about the day's favorable omens. They talk of Ra's rising strength, of Horus guarding his path. Sneferu nods, politely but barely listens. His gods may bless him, but gods don't count grain shipments. That task is left to weary scribes and his own sleepless head. One curious tidbit floats in his mind as he crosses the courtyard. A rumor that in Nubia workers smear themselves with crocodile dung to cool their skin against the sun. It sounds absurd, but then again, Egypt itself has its quirks. People will try anything when the desert bites. He wonders fleetingly if his laborers would take to the practice, then laughs quietly at the thought. Can you imagine 30,000 men glowing in crocodile muck, hauling his eternal tomb? A ridiculous picture, but it distracts him for a heartbeat. The morning meeting begins under a pavilion of reeds. Around him gather architects, overseers, supply chiefs, and scribes. Maps are spread across the sand lines, scratched with sticks, diagrams of angles measured in cubits. The arguments begin almost immediately. One insists the angle must steepen for grandeur. Another insists it must flatten to prevent collapse. They bicker like fishermen over nets, voices rising. Sneferu sits silently for a moment, watching the sunlight climb the poles of the pavilion, until finally he raises a hand. Silence ripples. His voice, calm but edged, reminds them all that he wants both strength and beauty. That is the impossible equation, and it gnaws at him like hunger. The meeting drags, but breakfast clings to his stomach like a stone. He feels the weight of every decision pressing heavier than the food. Historians still argue whether Sneferu was truly an innovator or merely stubborn, forcing his architects into experiments that nearly collapsed. Either way, here he sits, licking honey from his teeth, while pondering if his tomb will end in glory or in rubble. By mid-morning, the king excuses himself. He moves toward the edge of the palace grounds, where the sand stretches endlessly, pale and waiting. Somewhere beyond, the foundation stones already lie, square and silent. Workers swarm like ants, dragging ropes, shouting, sweating. Sneferu squints into the sunlight, shading his eyes. He feels the desert's heat rising even now, and he knows the rest of the day will be worse. His breakfast may have filled him, but it hasn't eased him. Instead, he carries the weight of stone, of men, of gods, and of doubt. And still, the pyramid waits. The sun has climbed higher now, and the sand itself seems to shimmer, as if the desert is pretending to be water. Sneferu rides out from the palace with a cluster of attendants, a canopy of woven reeds shading him as best as it can. The ride is not far, but already his linen tunic clings with sweat. He insists on seeing the sight himself. No papyrus drawing or second-hand report can quiet his restless doubts. If the pyramid is to rise, he wants to feel the ground, measure the shadows, and sense whether the gods approve of the angle. At the building site, the air thrums with activity. Men drag ropes over wooden sledges, oxen snort, and overseers shout with voices like cracked bronze. Sneferu dismounts and walks toward a cluster of men crouched in the sand. They are his surveyors, the mathematicians of their day, holding cords knotted in cubits, sighting rods and plumb lines that dangle in the breeze. At their center, a square has been staked into the sand. This will be the heart of his pyramid. One surveyor points toward the horizon, aligning his rod with the morning sun. Another gestures to the north, tracing lines in the sand with a reed. They are arguing again, voices rising in frustration. Should they align the pyramid strictly to the 4 cardinal points, as tradition insists, or tilt slightly to follow the imperceptible path of the pole star? Historians still argue whether Egyptians had perfected stellar alignment at this stage, or whether they relied mainly on solar shadows. Either way, here they are, scratching furrows in the sand, debating degrees as if a single cubit might decide Sneferu's fate in the afterlife. Sneferu crouches to watch. The ground here feels deceptively solid, though he knows the desert hides surprises shifting sand, cracked bedrock, hidden pockets of softer soil. One engineer kneels to sprinkle water on the sand, watching how it darkens and settles, a crude way to test density. Sneferu raises a brow at the method, but says nothing. Sometimes crude tests speak more truth than a polished speech. They stretch chords across the square, pulling them taut, measuring diagonals until they match. A right angle in the sand, meant to scale upward into eternity. One of the men places a plumb bob, its strings swaying, waiting for stillness. The king leans closer. This is what matters. Stillness. If the angle wavers, even by a hair, the error will grow like a crack in pottery, widening until the whole vessel shatters. The heat presses on him, but he stays. He wants to see the numbers. One scribe unfurls a scroll and begins noting down cubits, fractions, adjustments. His reed pen scratches furiously, the black ink blotting in spots where his hand trembles. Sneferu asks him to read the numbers aloud. The man does so, his voice unsteady. Sneferu listens, calculating silently, lips moving. He knows more than most expect. Pharaoh he may be, but ignorance is not a luxury he allows himself. Nearby, a small group of priests light incense, letting the smoke curl upward. They murmur prayers to Peta, lord of craftsmen, and to Thoth, keeper of wisdom. Sneferu watches the smoke drift against the pale sky. Ritual, yes, but also reassurance. If the priests bless the lines, perhaps the workers will believe the gods stand behind their measurements. Belief, after all, can move as much stone as muscle. A worker stumbles past with a skin of water, sweat pouring from his face. He pauses, staring at the cords and the marks in the sand. Sneferu notices his expression, awe mixed with exhaustion. To the common man, these lines might seem meaningless scratches, yet they will become walls taller than any palace. The king wonders what this man will tell his children, that he saw the god king himself kneeling in the sand, pointing at shadows like a carpenter. The thought amuses him. One of the architects clears his throat. He argues again for a steeper slope, finer, more impressive, a pyramid that thrusts high into the heavens. Sneferu feels his patience thinning. He gestures toward the horizon, where the mirage of distant dunes flicker. "Too steep," he says softly, "and the sand teaches us what happens." His attendants shift uneasily, surprised at the king's quiet rebuke. But Sneferu remembers well. He has seen walls fall, mud brick crumbling in the flood. Stone may be stronger, but gravity is the same cruel master. Still, he cannot silence his own imagination. What if the steeper angle worked? What if his pyramid became the tallest, sharpest, most dazzling structure the earth had ever seen? Wouldn't Ra himself cast a brighter glance down at such ambition? The temptation lingers like the taste of honey on his tongue. As midday approaches, the arguments subside. The chords remain stretched, the stakes hammered in, the first outline of the pyramid etched into the earth. Sneferu stands, brushing dust from his knees. Pour around him. Workers shield their eyes to watch. The king's shadow falls across the square, long and thin, like the first side of a triangle yet to be built. He wonders if, centuries from now, anyone will remember this moment, the day a restless man in the desert bent over chords and shadows, choosing the angle of his eternity. And still doubt gnaws. The lines in the sand look perfect now, but the desert shifts and stars wander. Will this alignment hold when the weight of stone bears down? Or will his dream tilt, crack, and falter? Sneferu turns away, hiding his unease behind a mask of calm. Pharaohs are not meant to show doubt. They are meant to stride forward, even when the ground trembles beneath them. The surveyors bow, the priests scatter ashes, and the workers return to their sledges. But the king walks back toward his canopy, deep in thought. Angles, shadows, stars so simple when drawn on papyrus, so terrifying when carved into reality. The pyramid waits to rise, but already it casts a shadow in his mind. The afternoon heat thickens, heavy as a woolen cloak, and the desert hums with the strain of men and animals. Sneferu rides slowly along the causeway, leading from the quarry pits toward the construction site, his eyes following the long procession of limestone blocks crawling across the sand. It is less a royal parade and more a daily grind, but to the king it is the pulse of his project, the veins and arteries that will carry stone into the heart of his pyramid. Each block is dragged on a wooden sledge, the grooves beneath slicked with water to reduce friction. Men bend low into the ropes, their backs gleaming with sweat, their voices groaning in unison as they heave. Overseers walk alongside, shouting counts, urging rhythm, raising whips when the pace falters. Oxen plod nearby, straining against yokes, their eyes dull with exhaustion. A cloud of dust rises and clings to everything's skin. Cloth, even the bread packed for later meals, tastes of grit. Sneferu breathes it in any way. He wants to see, to smell, to understand exactly what it costs to move eternity. A sledge creaks loudly, threatening to splinter. Workers panic, adjusting ropes, pouring more water, shoving wedges beneath the load. For a moment, the whole block wavers like a drunk. Sneferu feels his stomach tighten. If it crashes, the stone will shatter, and the men might too. But with one last heave, the block lurches forward again, sliding with a groan toward the ramp. A sigh of relief ripples through the tea. Sneferu allows himself a single nod. One stone closer. 10,000 more to go. Historians still argue whether ramps wrapped around pyramids or extended straight outward in colossal lengths. Sneferu watches his builders experiment with both. The current ramp rises shallow and wide, a river of packed clay, watered daily to keep dust from swallowing men whole. Slaves, villagers, skilled masons all climb it together, dragging sledges toward the waiting base. It looks chaotic, yet every movement is orchestrated. Lose the rhythm, and the ramp collapses under its own weight. As he walks along the ramp's base, Sneferu notices the constant hum of minor disasters. A rope frays, snapping against a man's face. Another worker slips, nearly crushed beneath a sled. A team of oxen suddenly balks, refusing to climb until their driver smears their hooves with fat. One overseer curses them, muttering about spirit. Sneferu frowns. If every stone costs so much chaos, how long can the kingdom bear it? But then, there are moments of strange beauty. As the men pull together, their chants fall into rhythm, a song rising from dry throats. It is not a hymn, not quite, but it carries the weight of prayer. The sound rolls across the desert, a steady beat that seems to guide the stones themselves. Even Sneferu feels it, a kind of heartbeat tying man, ox, and rock together. Perhaps, he thinks, this is how the gods hear Ustral rhythm carved into sweat. He remembers a curious tidbit told to him by a caravan trader, that in faraway lands, people harness elephants to move timber. Imagine that giant beasts hauling with trunks as well as muscles. Sneferu chuckles at the thought, then glances at his weary oxen. Egypt may not have elephants at hand, but the sight of 30 men straining on ropes has its own grim majesty. Still, he wonders whether some future king will envy him or pity him for choosing stone over lighter legacies. As the sun dips, he climbs higher on the ramp to survey the progress. Blocks are already forming the base rows of white limestone fitted so tightly a knife blade could not slip between them. Workers chip, grind, adjust, hammer wedges until the faces align. Sneferu squints, feeling the grit sting his eyes. This is where dreams meet labor, where visions turn into aching backs and splintered wood. Yet he cannot ignore the arithmetic in his head. Each block weighs more than a dozen men. Each row demands hundreds of blocks. Each pyramid demands tens of thousands. He calculates, lips moving until the numbers blur. The logistics spin like a wheel, endless, dizzying, and always, behind it all, the whisper of doubt. Can they truly finish before his body demands its tomb? Pharaohs do not live forever. Even the God King will one day lie cold, waiting for the stone to close around him. A scribe approaches, holding a tablet streaked with ink. He reports losses. A boat sank yesterday, 2 blocks gone, 3 men drowned. Sneferu inhales sharply. The Nile has swallowed its share, but hearing it aloud grates like sand between teeth. The scribe also notes that cedar logs from Byblos have not yet arrived, delaying scaffolding. Sneferu waves him away, though the irritation lingers. Every delay is another night without sleep. Evening creeps across the desert, painting the sky orange and violet. Workers trudge homeward to their camps, where fires flicker and smoke drifts upward. The oxen collapse into the sand, too tired to twitch their tails. The ramps lie silent for a moment, shadows long and jagged. Sneferu stands at the base, staring at the half-laid foundation, and feels both awe and dread. The pyramid is rising. Yes, but so slowly it might outlast him. He turns back toward Dosha, sand crunching beneath his sandals, the taste of dust still in his mouth. Moving stone is not just labor. It is an argument with time. An argument he must win if his name is to last beyond breath. Yet, even as he walks, the creak of sledges echoes in his ears, like a reminder that eternity drags one block at a time. Night gives way to another dawn, and before the first rays strike the sand, the camps outside Dosha are already stirring. 1,000 cook fires spark at once, their smoke curling into the faint light, carrying with it the smell of onions, fish, and bread. The laborers rise from mats of woven reeds, stretching sore shoulders, rubbing grit from their eyes. Sneferu stands at a distance, cloaked in linen, watching the hive come alive. He knows that his pyramid is not stone alone. It is body stems of thousands of them and the rhythm of their lives. Feeding this army is a daily miracle. Granaries empty like hourglasses, their contents funneled into baskets, loaded on donkeys, carried down to the camps. Jars of beer are rolled in bundles, corked with clay and smelling faintly sour. Garlic is portioned, its sharp scent clinging to the air. The men complain when rations thin, but Sneferu has learned the balance. A belly full enough to quiet rebellion, but not so full that they grow sluggish in the sun. It is a delicate equation, and one he obsesses over more than he admits. The king walks among them sometimes, though attendants beg him not to. He passes rows of huts, little more than mud bricks stacked against the wind, roofs patched with reeds. Women and children linger there too, because workers have families who follow them, setting up their own little villages in the desert's edge. Children play in the dust, their laughter colliding with the shouts of overseers. Sneferu notices it all, storing it in the back of his restless mind. One man kneels, strapping sandals made of papyrus rope. Another checks the wooden pegs he uses for levering blocks. A group of masons sharpen copper chisels on slabs of sandstone, sparks leaping faintly in the dim morning. Historians still argue whether copper tools could truly handle so much stonework, or whether harder alloys were imported quietly. Either way, here they are, sparks dancing while sweat already beads on their foreheads. By mid-morning, the whole camp moves like an organism. Teams assemble, ropes are slung, and chants begin again. Sneferu listens to the sound, the rhythm of thousands pulling together, voices rising and falling in a strange harmony. It is hypnotic, almost soothing. Even now, some fringe theorists whisper that sound itself, those low chants, helped vibrate and move the blocks more easily. A fanciful thought, perhaps, but standing here, feeling the hum in his chest, Sneferu almost believes it. But feeding and organizing them is only half the task. The greater challenge is loyalty. Men grumble when the sun burns, when blisters split their hands, when an overseer pushes too far. Already there are whispers that some consider slipping away, back to their villages. Sneferu cannot allow that. If the flow of workers thins, the pyramid halts. Pay so. Priests march among the camps, telling stories of divine purpose. They promise that to work for the Pharaoh is to guarantee a place in the afterlife, a share in eternity itself. The men nod, half believing, but Sneferu knows belief fades faster than hunger. He has instructed his officials to provide small comforts, music in the evenings, jugs of stronger beer on festival days, even meat on rare occasions. Once he ordered a troupe of dancers to perform near the campfires, their movements bright against the dark desert. The men cheered, spirits lifted for a time, but the next morning the stone was still heavy. Entertainment fades. Hunger and pain do not. Sneferu remembers one night when a worker approached him, eyes downcast, holding a child in his arms. The boy was ill, coughing, too weak to stand. The man begged for medicine. Sneferu had nodded to a priest, who mixed herbs and honey, whispered charms, and offered a poultice. Whether it worked or not, Sneferu never learned, but the man's gratitude lingered, as did the realization. These workers are not faceless masses. Each one has a story, and yet he needs them to disappear into a single machine of labor. That tension gnaws at him, especially when sleep evades him. From his shaded pavilion, the king watches as rows of men haul another block up the ramp. They strain, they stumble, but they move together. The pyramid is not just geometry and stone. It is willpower stitched together from thousands of hands, thousands of aching backs. Without them, there is nothing but an idea. And yet, Sneferu knows loyalty is fragile. The memory of uprisings is never far away. He recalls tales of village revolts, when granaries ran dry or taxes cut too deep. He cannot let that echo here. So, he plays the part of the benevolent father, walking the camps occasionally, speaking kindly, promising rewards, hinting at divine favor. Some believe, some do not, but all keep pulling, because in the shadow of the pyramid, to refuse is to risk everything. The day stretches long, the sun turning men into silhouettes against the white ramp. Sneferu squints, seeing them from afar, tiny figures bound to ropes, moving as if one body. To outsiders, perhaps it looks cruel. To him, it looks necessary. Eternity requires sacrifice, and every empire builds on the shoulders of the weary. As twilight falls, fires bloom again across the desert, flickering orange in the distance. The smell of roasting fish drifts toward the king. He feels the fatigue in his own bones, though he has not pulled a single stone. He wonders briefly, almost guiltily, if the workers dream of him at night, as he dreams of them. Do they curse his name in their sleep, or do they see themselves as threads in something greater? The pyramid rises another row taller today. Not much, just a handful of blocks fitted into place. But for Sneferu, each day's small gain is another night's restless thought. The workers sleep now, sprawled in their huts, while the king stares again into the horizon, counting not sheep but stones. even with all the workers moving stone, even with scribes bent over scrolls and overseers snapping whips. Sneferu knows none of it matters if the gods are not on his side. That thought is heavier than any block of limestone. The desert, after all, is not just sand and heat. It is a stage for unseen forces. If a gust of wind whips up too strong, if a crack splits a stone in the wrong place, people whisper that spirits are displeased. A pharaoh may rule men, but he still bows to omens. At dawn, priests gather before him, their linen robes bright against the pale sand. They carry incense, lotus flowers, and bowls of milk, their voices rising in a chant that trembles through the dry air. Sneferu stands stiffly, letting the smoke curl around him, pretending it soothes him. In truth, he watches the flame of the incense nervously. If it sputters out or drifts too far east, someone will declare the gods against him. These rituals feel like tightropes. One slip and the whole crowd believes disaster looms. One priest lifts a polished copper mirror, catching the sunlight. He holds it aloft, letting the reflection strike the stakes where surveyors laid the pyramid's base. The gods see, he intones. Sneferu nods gravely, though inside he thinks about how easily a copper plate can trick the eye. Still, he plays along. Belief is more valuable than copper, and the sight of him surrounded by smoke and sunlight will ripple through the workers like another ration of bread. Historians still argue whether Sneferu was deeply devout or merely pragmatic in his worship. To his people, the two were the same thing. To doubt the gods openly was to invite collapse, both spiritual and political. So he prays even when the words feel stale in his mouth. He offers wine. He lays lotus petals at statues. He even fasts some mornings, as if hunger could earn him divine precision. But he cannot ignore the strange, small omens that creep in daily. A falcon circles above the site, its cry sharp. The priests rush to interpret. Horus approves. Later that week, a vulture drifts overhead and suddenly whispers, spread that it is Nekbet, warning of death. Sneferu sighs at the contradictions. The same sky, the same birds, yet opposite messages. Which one is truth? Which one will the workers cling to? He realizes the real challenge is not reading omens, but managing how others read them. One evening, as the sun bleeds red across the horizon, Sneferu visits the inner sanctum of a small temple near Dosha. The chamber smells of resin and old stone. A statue of Ra, its golden face, faint in the lamplight, towers before him. Sneferu kneels. For a long moment he is silent, his hands pressed flat to the floor. Then he whispers not the grand proclamations of state rituals, but a quiet plea. He admits fear. He confesses doubt. He asks the sun god not for glory, but simply for stability, for stone that will not betray him, for angles that will hold. Behind him, the priest clears his throat. Sneferu straightens, returning to his role. Pharaohs are not meant to beg. Pharaohs command, yet alone with the statue, he could almost believe the gods prefer honesty to pomp. He recalls a quirky tale told to him by an old priest once, that a king long ago had sacrificed a goat on the foundations of his tomb. believing the spirit of the animal would hold up the walls. Sneferu chuckles softly at the memory. No goat spirit could lift blocks heavier than an army. Still, part of him wonders, what if it worked? Superstition clings in quiet corners of his mind, even as he scorns it in public. As work continues, omens grow louder in the talk of the camps. A collapsed ramp, the gods frown. A man crushed by stone. The gods demand appeasement. A streak of lightning over the desert, surely a sign. Sneferu knows these murmurs can sap morale faster than hunger. So he orders festivals, parades of priests carrying banners, dancers waving palms, music rising in the night. If the people believe the gods are smiling, the work will continue. If they believe otherwise, ropes go slack and rebellion whispers. The most nerve-wracking ritual is the daily sunrise. Sneferu insists on being present each morning when the sun clears the horizon. He watches the light strike the pyramid's rising face, watching for signs, too much shadow, too little glow, a cloud drifting in the wrong direction. Most days the sun rises clean, warm, reassuring. But one morning, dust storms veil the horizon, turning the sun into a dull red ball. Workers mutter, some bow, some spit on the ground. Sneferu forces a smile, raising his arms as if to embrace the omen. Ra blesses us with fire today, he declares loudly. Some cheer. Others look doubtful. He goes back to his chambers, wondering whether even the gods can be spun like a scroll. At night, lying in his bed, he replays the day's rituals. Did he bow deeply enough? Did he say the right words? Was the incense too thick? He feels absurd for fretting, yet he cannot stop. Stone may hold his body, but only the gods decide whether his spirit endures. He knows this, and so he worries. Every prayer is another layer of mortar, invisible but necessary, to bind his pyramid to eternity. The desert hums with calculation. To the untrained eye, the pyramid site looks like chaos ropes, snapping taut, sledges groaning, men shouting, but to Sneferu it is geometry made flesh. He spends the day with his architects, who squat in the sand with sharpened reeds, sketching lines and angles that seem impossibly abstract until they are carved into stone. Sneferu watches with the intensity of a gambler staring at dice. Numbers are his burden now. A row of surveyors unfurl knotted cords, stretching them tight across the rising base. They measure, compare, argue. One insists that the slope should be 54 degrees for majesty. Another swears 45 degrees will guarantee stability. A third insists they need to account for the settling of lower stones. Their voices blur like cicadas in the heat, each man convinced he is the voice of reason. Sneferu's jaw tightens. It is not easy to command eternity when eternity depends on men who cannot agree over a cubit. Historians still argue whether Sneferu himself had knowledge of mathematics or simply relied on his vision. But today, he interrupts the debate, asking pointedly how much the base will spread if the angle is too steep. The architects glance at one another, startled. A pharaoh questioning numbers. Yet Sneferu demands answers. They explain with sand drawings. The higher the angle, the faster the weight presses outward, the quicker cracks form. Power, the lower the angle, the safer the structure, but the less impressive it appears. It is a game of pride against gravity, and gravity usually wins. He thinks of Djoser's step pyramid at Saqqara, still standing but crude compared to his vision. Sneferu wants sleek sides, smooth faces, no steps. But smooth faces are merciless. A single miscalculation, and the whole thing collapses inward like a poorly stacked loaf of bread. He has already seen cracks appear in smaller projects. He does not want his tomb to be another lesson carved into rubble. A mathematician sprinkles water on the sand, pressing a stick into it to show how weight sinks unevenly. Sneferu frowns. This desert was once riverbed layers of clay and sand mixed beneath. If the foundation is wrong, no amount of prayer will save it. They talk of leveling the bedrock, of chiseling down the uneven ridges until the ground itself becomes a single plane. He orders more men brought to hammer, smooth and flatten until the desert is tamed beneath geometry. He recalls, with a dry smile, a fringe tale whispered in the court that some claim pyramids are built to channel cosmic energy, that their angles mirror the heavens. Sneferu does not dismiss it outright. He looks at the stars nightly. Their slow wheel across the sky feels deliberate. Perhaps, he wonders, geometry is not merely practical, but divine. To measure angles, to trace triangles maybe, that is itself a prayer. The work continues. Copper chisels clink against stone. Plumb lines dangle from wooden frames, swinging gently in the hot breeze. Every swing feels like a heartbeat. The architects crouch to note the stillness, then mark the stone. Sneferu leans forward, hands clasped, eyes narrowed. To an outsider, he looks like a man watching builders. To himself, he feels like a man gambling with his soul. When the afternoon grows unbearable, he retreats to a shaded awning. But even there, his mind will not quiet. He sketches triangles into the sand with his fingertip, erasing, redrawing, changing the slope by tiny fractions. He imagines the pyramid rising in different forms, tall and sharp, squat and broad, bent halfway. Each shape feels both magnificent and dangerous. His attendants glanced nervously, unused to seeing their king doodle like a restless student. As evening nears, one of the architects dares to raise a delicate subject. If, my lord, the angle fails, what then? The words hang heavy in the air. Sneferu does not answer immediately. Instead, he watches the sun sink, its disk forming a perfect curve against the horizon. Finally, he murmurs, "Then we learn, and we build again." The men exchange uneasy looks. Building again means more lives, more grain, more years. But Sneferu has already decided. Eternity does not forgive shortcuts. If the first attempt falters, then another must rise. His name cannot be tied to failure. He stands, brushing sand from his knees. Workers chant in the distance, the sound rolling like waves. He hears numbers within it, rhythms of geometry hidden in human breath. Perhaps that is what pyramids truly are, not just stone and math, but the harmony of thousands bending together into a single angle. Sneferu returns to the palace under the reddening sky, the smell of dust in his nose, numbers still spinning in his head. He knows sleep will evade him again tonight, for while others dream of rest, he dreams of triangles. The bent pyramid looms over Dosha like an accusation. At first glance, it looks almost complete, its sides gleaming white in the sun, its point already stabbing at the sky. But if you stare too long, you notice the strange kink halfway up, where the angle shifts suddenly, making the structure look almost like it is bowing under some invisible weight. Sneferu rides out often just to stand in its shadow, arms folded, jaw set, pretending it pleases him. But in truth, it gnaws at him. The story of that bend is a story of fear. His architects had begun boldly, setting the angles steep, eager to make his pyramid rise faster and taller than any before. For a while it seemed glorious smooth, sharp, ambitious, but cracks whispered in the stone, faint at first, then spreading like veins through limestone. One block shifted, another creaked, and suddenly the grand slope threatened to crumble into ruin. Sneferu remembers the day vividly, his builders frantic, men shouting, ropes snapping, dust filling the air as the pyramid itself seemed to groan. He felt a chill colder than the Nile in winter. If the whole structure collapsed, it would not just bury stone, it would bury his name. Historians still argue whether Sneferu himself ordered the angle change, or whether frightened architects begged him to. Either way, the command was given. From that point upward, reduce the slope, lessen the risk, bend the ambition. And so the bent pyramid was born, half pride and half compromise, a monument caught between dreams and caution. Now, whenever Sneferu walks around its base, he cannot escape the stares of workers. They don't say it aloud, but he can read it in their eyes. The Pharaoh built a mistake. They whisper at night that the gods rejected the first design. Priests do their best to smother those whispers, declaring that the bend itself is divine, a bow to the heavens, a gesture of humility. Sneferu lets them spin the tale, though he doesn't believe it himself. He knows it was not humility that changed the angle, but fear. Still, the bent pyramid stands. Its lower half gleams like polished ivory, catching the sun so brightly it blinds anyone approaching. The upper half, though, slants more gently, giving it a strange, almost awkward silhouette. To some, it looks like a giant who stumbled mid-step. To Sneferu, it is a constant reminder that geometry punishes arrogance, yet he cannot abandon it. Too much blood and stone have been poured into its base. Workers died hauling those blocks. Men broke their backs, shaping its slopes. To leave it half-finished would dishonor them, and, more importantly, dishonor him. So he insists the work continue, though now with greater caution. Every night he lies awake, wondering if it will hold, if the cracks spread, if the upper stones shift, then his tomb becomes rubble, and his legacy becomes laughter. Pharaohs do not tolerate laughter. One evening, as he stands staring at the bent silhouette against the crimson sky, a scribe dares to speak. Perhaps, my lord, it is a blessing. None before you have built such a shape. None after you may dare. Sneferu almost smiles, but the words cut both ways. Unique, yes, but will eternity remember it as innovational as failure? Historians still debate it even now. He recalls a curious tale told by foreign traders that in faraway mountains, people carve shrines into cliffsides, using the natural slope to steady their temples. He wonders if they, too, have faced collapsing stone. Perhaps every people wrestles with gravity, and every monument is a negotiation with fear. At night, when he dreams, the pyramid bends more sharply, folding in on itself until it swallows him whole. He wakes, sweating, linen tangled, convinced for a moment that the roof of his chamber has shifted. He sends servants scurrying to check the palace walls, though they always return, assuring him nothing is amiss. But he knows the truth. Stone remembers mistakes. And yet the bent pyramid still gleams by day, visible for miles across the desert. Travelers sailing the Nile point to it, marveling at its size. To them, it is awe. To Sneferu, it is a scar. But scars, too, tell stories. Perhaps he thinks the gods are teaching him patience. Perhaps they bend his pride the way his pyramid bends skyward. Or perhaps he fears it is only a warning that no man, not even a pharaoh, can force eternity to obey. The desert may have supplied endless sand, but stone alone does not build a pyramid. Sneferu's ambitions reach beyond Dosha, stretching across rivers, mountains, and seas. Every day, while men strain on ropes and sledges, his messengers scurry across the kingdom, carrying scrolls sealed with wax, negotiating the lifelines that feed his project. For Sneferu, diplomacy has become as exhausting as engineering. He sits beneath a shaded canopy, scribes arrayed before him, unfurling lists of what the pyramid still requires. Limestone flows steadily enough from Tura quarries, but cedar wooda, that is another story. Egypt has little timber of its own worth building with. Mud brick villages burn to Italy. Palm trunks split like straw under pressure. For scaffolding and roofing, only cedar will do, and that cedar grows in the distant mountains of Byblos. Ships must be built, crews recruited, sailors sent across seas riddled with storms and unfriendly harbors. Sneferu remembers the first time he walked among the cedar beams offloaded at Memphis. Their scent-sharp resinous, unlike anything Egyptian, lingered in the air, so foreign it almost felt sacred. He ran a hand along the grain, imagining scaffolds, ramps, sledges, all steadied by these mountain gifts. Without them, the pyramid is just a pile of stone waiting to collapse. Historians still argue whether Sneferu personally negotiated with the kings of Byblos, or whether envoys carried his will. Either way, the cedar flowed, though at a price of copper, gold, and grain. Trade caravans rattled down dusty routes from Sinai, bringing turquoise and copper, ore, the lifeblood of chisels and saws. Nubian expeditions returned with cattle and slaves. their dark skins glistening in the sun as they marched into Egypt's service. Every block of stone set at Dosha is, in truth, balanced on invisible cords, stretching across half the ancient world. One day, a foreign envoy arrives at the palace. His beard is oiled, his robe stitched with colored thread, his accent thick. He bows deeply before Sneferu, presenting gifts: carved ivory, jars of resin, a strange stone that glitters green in the light. The court gasps softly. Sneferu, though barely smiles. He has learned that gifts are just preludes to demands. The envoy speaks of safe passage for cedar logs, but also requests Egyptian grain in exchange. Grain. Always grain. Sneferu hides his irritation, nodding graciously, while his mind calculates. Each sack of barley traded is another ration lost to his workers. But without cedar, the pyramid stalls. He leans back, feigning calm, his voice low and measured. Egypt's granaries are vast, he says, and the Nile's floods are generous. The envoy beams, believing generosity is assured. Sneferu does not tell him how close the margins already are, how each festival strains his storerooms, how his workers mutter if bread grows thin. Pharaohs are not meant to reveal hunger. Later, alone with his advisors, he admits the worry. We gamble on the river, he says softly. If the flood fails us, the pyramid stops. His viziers nod solemnly. Everyone knows the Nile is both gift and tyrant. A poor flood year means not just famine in villages, but silence at the construction site. Eternity, it seems, can be delayed by something as ordinary as low water. Amid the trade negotiations, there are also politics. Tribal leaders in Sinai demand protection in exchange for copper shipments. Nubian chieftains grumble about Egyptian raids. Biblis, kings whisper that other empires court them, offering sweeter bargains. Sneferu navigates it all with a mixture of gold, promises, and threats. He must. For a pyramid is not only stone and sweat, is diplomacy in stacked form. A curious tidbit circulates among his courtiers that some of the cedar logs arriving from Biblis are inscribed with foreign symbols. Prayers carved by mountain priests, hoping their gods will bless the timber. Sneferu once examined one closely. Strange curves and lines, meaningless to him, yet beautiful. He wondered briefly if, when fitted into his pyramid, those foreign prayers would echo alongside Egyptian chants. Perhaps eternity will carry many languages at once. When the trade ships finally arrive at Memphis, laden with cedar, the city erupts in celebration. The logs are paraded like sacred relics, workers touching them reverently as if they carried Ra's blessing. Sneferu allows the spectacle, though inside he calculates again. How many beams, how many sledges, how many ramps. Always the math, always the worry. At night he sits by a low oil lamp, staring at maps. His scribes point to red lines tracing trade routes. Across Sinai for copper, up the Nile for cattle, across the sea for cedar. Each line looks fragile, a thread that could snap in the wind. He knows if even one phrase, the pyramid falters. And so the Pharaoh of Egypt lord of the two lands, spends his evenings not in feasting or song, but in quiet dread over shipping schedules. The bent pyramid looms in the distance, half triumph, half warning. To make another, stronger one, Sneferu must keep every caravan moving, every boat afloat, every envoy satisfied. It is not the gods alone who demand offerings, it's geography itself, and geography is never merciful. Inside the palace at Dosha, the noise of hammers and sledges fades into a different kind of chaos. Voices, footsteps, whispers of intrigue. Sneferu may rule a kingdom and command pyramids, but he is also the father of princes, the husband of wives, the center of a family that carries its own burdens. The pyramid rises outside, but inside the palace, his legacy is measured in sons, daughters, and rivalries. In the mornings, while workers gather rations and overseers bark orders, Sneferu shares breakfast with some of his household. Bowls of lentils and bread line the low table. A few wives sit nearby, veiled and polite, while children chatter too loudly for his tired ears. The youngest ones scramble over cushions, tugging at each other, while older sons speak more carefully, always watching their father's expressions. Each word feels like a small performance, as if they are auditioning for something none of them dare name. Inheritance. The word lurks unspoken. Everyone knows that pyramids are not just tombs, they are thrones carved in stone. Whoever follows Sneferu will inherit not only his crown, but also the burden of monuments unfinished. Already, whispers ripple through the palace. Which son will step forward? Which mother's child will claim favor? Which branch of the family will be remembered and which forgotten? Historians still argue how many wives Sneferu truly had, or which of his children he favored. The records are hazy, the names overlapping, but within the palace walls, the tension is sharper than any copper blade. One wife petitions for her son to be made heir, bringing gifts and flattery. Another arranges for priests to bless her household, weaving divinity into her child's future. Sneferu listens with half a smile, though his patience wears thin. A pharaoh cannot afford favoritism too openly, yet he cannot ignore it either. One afternoon, a servant announces that Prince Khufu requests audience. The boy, though not so young, anymore enters, with a scroll tucked beneath his arm. He bows, perhaps too deeply, then launches into a description of some new architectural idea he has seen drawn by the court's scribes. Sneferu listens, nodding, his eyes narrowing. Ambition burns in the boy's tone, perhaps too brightly. The thought stirs both pride and unease. Will Khufu finish what Sneferu begins, or will he chase his own vision, building higher, riskier, hungrier? The seed of Gizeh's great pyramid might already be sprouting in that eager mind. Family dinners bring their own performance. Musicians pluck lyres, dancers twirl, and servants pour wine into alabaster cups. But beneath the laughter lies competition. Sneferu catches the glances, sons sizing each other up, mothers whispering behind veils, daughters exchanging secrets with sidelong looks. Even the servants know more than they say, gossiping in corners about who might one day rule. The palace hums with ambition, a quieter but sharper echo of the work camps outside. Sneferu recalls a curious tidbit once told by an old courtier, that in some foreign kingdoms, rulers pass crowns not to sons but to brothers, believing siblings steadier than children. He wonders if that might ease his own household's tension. But Egypt is not such a land. Here, the throne passes down, not sideways. And so, his sons circle like hawks, each hoping to swoop. At night, when the palace grows still, Sneferu sometimes walks its halls alone. He passes chambers where wives and children sleep, listening to their breaths beyond closed doors. He wonders if they dream of him as a father or as a crown. He wonders if they resent the endless noise of stone and labor that has stolen him from their games, their stories, their laughter. Perhaps one day they will only remember him as a distant figure, a shadow against a pyramid wall. Historians still argue whether Sneferu loved deeply or ruled coldly. The truth is that love and rule are tangled. He loves his children, yet he cannot afford to be merely a father. Every smile, every promise, every stern glance is weighted with politics. He cannot give affection without shaping loyalty, cannot scold without shaping ambition. His family is both blood and state, and sometimes he wonders if he is building a pyramid in their hearts, as well layer upon layer of expectations, heavy as stone. One evening, during a family feast, a small accident shifts the mood. A servant trips, spilling wine across the table. It splashes onto a prince's tunic, drawing laughter from some, scorn from others. Sneferu notices which sons laugh and which scowls. He tucks the detail away, another small clue to character. Leadership is revealed not in triumphs, but in spills of wine. When the feast ends and the musicians pack away their instruments, Sneferu retreats to his private chamber. He sits on a low stool, the sounds of the palace fading to silence. Outside, the bent pyramid gleams in the moonlight, its bent slopes mirroring his own divided household, part triumph, part flaw, still standing, still growing, but imperfect. He wonders if his sons will one day stare at their own monuments with the same mix of pride and regret. The night air cools, drifting through the open shutters. Somewhere in the palace, a child coughs in his sleep. Sneferu rubs his temples, thinking not just of blocks and ramps, but of names and heirs. He knows the truth. Pyramids rise on stone, but dynasties rise on blood, and both are fragile. The desert is never silent, not even at night. During the day it howls with wind and work, but when darkness falls it shifts to a softer hum, the rustle of reeds, the murmur of water, the beat of drums from distant camps. Sneferu knows that even kings cannot hold their people with stone alone. So he turns often to the Nile, the wide river that nourishes Egypt and binds it together. Where stone exhausts, celebration restores. On festival days, the king orders barges, prepared broad wooden decks, lashed with ropes, sails painted bright, prow carved into shapes of lotus and falcon. The cedar beams brought from Byblus now serve a more joyful purpose. forming platforms wide enough for dancers and musicians. When Sneferu steps aboard, the crowd along the riverbank cheers, their voices rising like another tide. Priests scatter petals on the water, children splash in the shallows. Women ululate until the sound pierces the air like trumpets. The barge drifts slowly, rowers dipping oars in rhythm. Musicians play lyres, harps, and drums. Dancers whirl in linen skirts, their anklets jingling. Servants pour wine into alabaster cups, handing them to guests who laugh and shout blessings. Sneferu sits beneath a canopy, the cool breeze lifting the edges of his robe. For once, he feels the weight of stones slide from his shoulders. Historians still argue whether these boat festivals were political tools or genuine displays of joy. For Sneferu, they are both. The workers need to see their king, not just as a shadow behind palace walls, but as a living presence, smiling, generous, part of their world. He raises his cup, letting the sun flash against the gold, and the people roar louder. Bread is handed out, beer flows, and for a few hours the endless burden of hauling limestone is forgotten. He remembers a curious tidbit shared by a Greek traveler, though the Greeks are centuries yet unborn. The tale is retold by scribes long afterward, that river festivals sometimes end with mock battles, boats crashing playfully against each other. Sneferu chuckles at the thought. In Egypt, though, the Nile is not for play. It is sacred. To waste its waters on games would risk angering the gods. Instead, Egyptians celebrate with songs that echo across the banks, praising Ra, praising Osiris, and, of course, praising Sneferu. But celebration is never just celebration. Sneferu watches carefully as the barge glides along. He notes how the people shout his name, how they smile when food is plentiful, how their shoulders ease when music fills the air. He knows this spectacle reassures them. Their king is strong, their kingdom abundant, the gods pleased. A pyramid may take years to rise, but a festival rises in a day. Both are monuments, one in stone, the other in memory. As the sun sets, the river shimmers like molten copper. Fires are lit along the banks, their smoke curling upward, their flames mirrored in the water. The king's barge glows in the twilight, a floating palace. The workers cheer until their voices grow hoarse. Some kneel, some throw handfuls of grain into the water as offerings. Sneferu raises his arms in blessing, though inwardly he thinks again of supplies, of grain tallies, of ships still overdue. Even in celebration, his mind ticks like a scribe's pen. When the festival ends and the barge returns to shore, the people spill back into their camps, singing, drunk, happy. For a while, at least, their complaints will soften. Sneferu steps onto land, escorted back to his palace, the sound of drums fading behind him. He feels both relief and exhaustion. Relief that the people believe. Exhaustion that belief must be constantly fed like a fire. In the quiet that follows, he walks to the riverbank alone. The Nile flows steadily, dark and wide, whispering against the reeds. He kneels, dipping his hands into the cool water. It runs through his fingers, eternal, endless, more enduring than any pyramid. He wonders if one day, when all the stone crumbles, the river will still flow as if he never lived at all. He rises, brushing sand from his hands, and glances back at the silhouette of his pyramid under the moon. Festivals may dazzle, but the pyramid is the true measure of his reign. Yet without the Nile, without these rituals of reassurance, even stone would not stand. Eternity, he realizes, is built not only of limestone, but of song and celebration. The sound of celebration never lasts long. By the next morning, the camps echo again with groans, coughs, and the crack of whips. Men file back to the ramps, but Sneferu cannot ignore the darker rhythm that hums beneath the chants, the rhythm of accidents. The pyramid may gleam under the sun, but behind that gleam lies blood and broken bones. He hears of it first from a scribe who approaches with downcast eyes. Two men crushed beneath a block, he mutters, barely loud enough to be heard. Sneferu stiffens. He waves for details. The story spills out. Ropes frayed, the stone slid, shouts too late. When workers scrambled back, dust cleared to reveal only silence. The men were gone, their bodies trapped beneath tons of limestone. Sneferu closes his eyes. The desert has no mercy. He knows accidents are inevitable. No project of this size can be bloodless. But inevitability does not ease the weight. Each man lost whispers of divine disfavor. Already, priests mutter that perhaps the gods are displeased with the angle, the rituals, or even with Sneferu himself. A pharaoh must project calm, yet inside he feels the cracks widen not just in stone, but in spirit. Historians still argue whether laborers were volunteers fulfilling duty or slaves pressed into work. In reality, Sneferu sees both. Farmers serving during flood season, craftsmen hoping for royal favor, captives driven with no choice. And all of them bleed the same when a stone falls. Their deaths ripple through the camps. Workers lower their voices, pulling more slowly, eyes darting toward the ramp, as if it were a monster. Fear spreads faster than rumor. One afternoon, Sneferu rides out to the site himself. He insists on seeing the place where the stone crushed them. The sand is stained darker there, though the bodies have already been carried away. Workers bow their heads as he passes, silent, waiting to see if their king will curse them for weakness or bless them with compassion. He stands still for a long moment, staring at the ramp before ordering libations poured. Priests chant, spilling beer and milk onto the sand, calling on Osiris to receive the dead. Sneferu does not speak, but his silence weighs heavier than words. That night he lies awake, hearing again the groan of sledges, the sudden crack of ropes. His dreams are filled with collapsing walls, corridors caving in, his body trapped beneath rubble. He wakes gasping, linen twisted around him like coils of rope. Servants rush in with lamps, but he waves them away. Sleep is no refuge when stone itself haunts him. The following week brings more injuries. A man slips, his leg shattered beneath a sled. Another tumbles from scaffolding, his cries echoing before ending abruptly. Sneferu hears each report with clenched teeth. He knows the tally grows higher than his scribes admit. For every death recorded, there are others quietly buried in sand, forgotten in the shadow of ambition. One fringed tale spreads among the camps, that the pyramid itself is hungry, devouring men as offerings. Some even whisper that Sneferu demands the deaths, feeding the monument with lives as surely as with stone. The rumor chills him, though he knows it is false. He does not crave their deaths yet. He cannot deny the pyramid rises on them. To counter the whispers, he orders ceremonies. Priests light incense, chant blessings, and assure the men that the fallen walk with the gods. Extra rations are distributed. Beer flows more freely. For a day, the camp hums with cautious relief, but Sneferu knows comfort is temporary. The next accident will start the whispers anew. Historians still argue whether these losses were seen as tragedies or as inevitable sacrifices. Sneferu himself wrestles with the question. He feels each death like a stone pressing against his chest. Yet he pushes forward, because stopping would mean failure, and failure would erase not just him, but his dynasty. One evening, as the sun bleeds across the horizon, he walks alone along the base of the pyramid. Workers watch from a distance, whispering. He places his palm flat against the limestone, feeling its chill even in the heat. "How many more?" he murmurs. No one answers. The stone does not care. It demands only weight, only labor, only lives. He returns to his palace heavy with silence. The songs of festivals seem far away now, drowned by the groans of sledges and the cries of the injured. The pyramid rises, yes, but with each row of stone. Sneferu feels himself pulled deeper into a bargain he cannot fully name. Eternity, it seems, does not come free. The nights have grown longer for Sneferu. He lies in his chamber, linen sheets tangled, the oil lamp flickering faintly, and the question returns again and again. Will this pyramid truly guard him forever? The priests speak of eternity as if it was simple. Build a tomb, inscribe the prayers, leave offerings, and the soul will pass unharmed into the field of reeds. But Sneferu knows eternity is not simple. Eternity is heavy. Eternity is uncertain. He imagines himself centuries from now, lying within the pyramid's heart. Will the corridors remain sealed, his body untouched? Or will thieves dig their way in, stripping his coffin, scattering his bones? Even kings are not safe from greed. He has heard tales of older tombs already robbed, their treasures melted down, their names forgotten. The idea gnaws at him, to be remembered only as a looted corpse. Historians still argue whether Egyptians truly believed their pyramids indestructible, or whether they accepted deep down that plunder was inevitable. Sneferu leans toward dread. He sees eternity less as promise than as gamble. Each stone is a wager against time, each corridor a bet against thieves. And though his pyramid rises strong and gleaming, he knows time always cheats in the end. During council meetings, when architects argue angles and priests chant blessings, His mind drifts elsewhere, to the chambers deep within. He envisions the burial chamber lined with granite, smooth and impenetrable. He imagines his sarcophagus carved from the hardest stone, sealed so tightly even air cannot slip in. He debates whether the corridors should twist and turn to confuse intruders, or whether simple, direct passage honors the gods better. The priests argue for ceremony, the engineers for security. Sneferu listens, torn between ritual and survival. At twilight, he often climbs a low hill near Doshat. From there, he can see both pyramids, the bent one and the red one, rising nearby. Two monuments, two shadows stretching across the desert. He stares at them and wonders, are they symbols of triumph or of desperation? He thinks of eternity not as peace but as vigilance, a constant struggle to remain remembered. One evening, a scholar priest tells him of an ancient belief that names themselves hold power. As long as a name is spoken, the soul endures. But once the name is forgotten, the soul withers into dust. Sneferu grips that thought like a rope. Perhaps it is not the pyramid itself that guarantees eternity, but the voices it inspires. If his monuments are vast enough, dazzling enough, perhaps generations will keep saying his name. That, more than stone, is survival. And yet, doubts creep back. What if storms erode the limestone? What if floods carve channels into its base? What if an earthquake one day tilts the whole monument into ruin? Sneferu knows the earth shifts beneath the desert. He has seen walls crack for no reason, mud brick crumble without warning. The gods may guard him, but gravity is relentless. A curious tidbit drifts back to him from one of his envoys, that in a faraway land, tribes burn their dead, believing smoke carries the soul upward. Sneferu snorts at the absurdity. Fire consumes, stone preserves. Yet, in a quiet moment, he wonders they're wiser than he admits. If fire leaves nothing to steal, perhaps it is safer than stone. But then he shakes his head. Pharaohs do not vanish in smoke. Pharaohs must remain bodies intact, names carved, monuments towering. Smoke disappears, stone commands. Late at night, he walks the unfinished corridors of his red pyramid, torchlight throwing shadows against bare stone. He runs his hand along the walls, imagining them polished smooth, covered in inscriptions of his name. The echo of his footsteps lingers, hollow, haunting. He pauses in the central chamber, still raw, dust clinging to the corners. "Will this hold me?" he whispers. His voice bounces back, faint and mocking. Historians still argue whether Sneferu's worries were practical or spiritual, but to him they are both. Practical, because stone collapses. Spiritual, because memory fades. He feels caught between them, restless, pacing at night while the desert sleeps. The pyramid may rise higher each day, but his doubts rise faster. At dawn, he returns to his chamber, weary, his eyes red. He has seen eternity in his dreams, and it looks fragile. Yet he forces himself upright, dons his crown, and steps into the sunlight once again. He must, for a pharaoh cannot show doubt, even if doubt is all he carries. At Dosha, not far from the scar of the bent pyramid, Another monument rises steadily. This one is calmer, more deliberate, its lines cleaner, its slope gentler. The Red Pyramid, as it will later be called for the blush of its limestone in the sun, feels to Sneferu like a deep breath after years of anxiety. Where the bent pyramid bends in shame, this one stands straight, firm, reassuring. Each morning, Sneferu rides out to the site and sees the progress. The workers move more confidently now. The slope has been adjusted, less ambitious but safer. Stones fit more smoothly, ramps hold stronger. Fewer cries of panic echo from collapsing scaffolds. It is not free of accidents. No project of this scale could ever be but compared to the chaos of the bent pyramid. This build feels almost merciful. The sound of sledges scraping, ropes straining, men chanting, it is no longer frantic but steady, like the heartbeat of a kingdom finally in rhythm. Historians still argue whether Sneferu himself ordered the shift to a gentler angle, or whether his architects, scarred from the bent pyramid's near collapse, pushed for caution. Either way, the decision proves wise. The pyramid rises like a mountain shaped by human will, its sides gleaming under the desert sun. Workers whisper that perhaps the gods have relented, that this pyramid carries their blessing more fully. Sneferu allows the whispers to grow. Belief, once fragile, now strengthens again. He notices it in the camps. Men sing more freely in the evenings, their laughter carrying across the desert. Priests declare that the smoother slope pleases Ra, its faces better angled to greet the sun. Even the overseers seem less tense, their voices sharper with order than with fear. The whole enterprise feels lighter, though stone still weighs the same. One afternoon, Sneferu climbs the lower levels himself. He grips a rope, steadying his steps, attendants fluttering nervously behind him. The view from above takes his breath, the desert stretching endless, the Nile shimmering like a silver ribbon, villages dotting its banks, smoke rising from cook fires. For a moment, he feels the pyramid not as burden, but as triumph. Here he stands above his people, above the desert, closer to the gods. This is what he has wanted all along. Permanence without panic. A curious tidbit floats through his mind as he gazes outward. He once heard that in Mesopotamia, kings build temples shaped like mountains, called ziggurats, but none of them hold tombs. Those are for gods, not men. Sneferu smiles faintly. Perhaps Egypt alone dares to house kings in mountains of stone. Perhaps only here does a man demand eternity alongside the gods. Evenings at the Red Pyramid's site feel calmer too. Fires flicker along the base, men sharing bread and beer, their chants softer, more like lullabies than war cries. Sneferu sometimes lingers, cloaked and unrecognized, listening. He hears them tell stories of Ra guiding their ropes, of Sneferu himself walking beside them unseen, of the pyramid glowing at night as if lit from within. Myths already cling to the stones, even before completion. The king allows himself a rare smile. Still, doubt never vanishes completely. In quiet moments, he walks the corridors as they lengthen inward, torchlight spilling across granite blocks. He runs his hand along the smooth walls, listening to the hollow echo. It is stronger, firmer than the bent pyramid, but he cannot silence the thought. Will it hold not just stone, but memory? Will it outlast storms, floods, thieves, time? He wants to believe, yes, he almost does. The red pyramid grows row by row, its silhouette sharper each week. From the Nile, travelers can already see its shape rising, a beacon of Egypt's might. Priests declare it proof of divine favor. Courtiers praise Sneferu as the builder of mountains. Even his restless mind eases, if only slightly. Perhaps, at last, he has found the angle of peace. One evening, as the sun dips low, painting the pyramid crimson, Sneferu stands at its base and breathes deeply. The desert is quiet, the workers asleep, the ramps empty. The pyramid glows red as if it carries its own fire. He places his hand on the stone, cool against his palm, and whispers, "You will remember me." For the first time in years, the words feel less like a plea and more like a promise. The years have thinned Sneferu's hair and slowed his stride, but he still walks the sand of Dosha, leaning lightly on a staff carved from cedar. The red pyramid now stands complete, its massive sides catching the afternoon sun, glowing like fire against the horizon. Workers have dispersed, scaffolds dismantled, ramps leveled back into desert. What remains is silencer, silence vast enough to make the pyramid itself seem alive. The king's attendants trail behind at a distance, giving him space. Sneferu does not speak much these days. He prefers to walk slowly round the base, tracing his hand along the limestone blocks, each one fitted tighter than memory itself. His fingers catch on the edges, cool despite the heat, and he remembers the years of sweat, the shouts, the chants, the endless arguments over slope and stone. All of it now frozen into stillness. He turns his gaze upward. The pyramid's tip glints white, nearly piercing the sky. The bent pyramid lingers in the distance too, its crooked silhouette, a reminder of missteps and lessons. Two monuments, both his one flawed, one serene. Together they tell his story more honestly than any scribe ever could. Ambition, failure, correction, persistence. Historians still argue whether Sneferu was proud of the bent pyramid or ashamed of it in his final years. Perhaps the truth is that he felt both. Pride, because it still stood despite its flaw. Shame, because the flaw spoke louder than his commands. But now, as he leans on his staff and watches the red pyramid glow redder in the setting sun, he feels something simpler, relief. He has carved his name into the desert not once, but twice. One may bend, the other may endure, yet both whisper his memory into eternity. Children from nearby villages sometimes wander close, staring at the massive slopes, pointing at the sharp angles. Sneferu watches them from afar, a faint smile touching his lips. They are proof enough for him if children are already telling stories. Then his name will last. The pyramid does not need to guard him alone. Voices will guard him too. As the sun dips lower, shadows stretch long. across the sand. Sneferu pauses, leaning more heavily on his staff, and inhales the desert air, dusty, dry, tinged with smoke from distant hearths. He knows his body grows weaker. He feels the weight of years pressing more firmly than any stone. Soon, priests will carry him within the chambers he ordered carved, and the pyramid will become not a project but his shelter. He is not afraid, or at least he tells himself he is not. He raises his eyes once more to the glowing monument, and for a moment his doubts quiet. Eternity will come whether he fears it or not. The stone will speak long after his voice is gone. Perhaps that is enough. Sneferu turns slowly toward his palace, his figure small against the vast red mountain behind him. The sun sinks lower, gilding the pyramid in fire, and the desert falls silent, as if bowing to the last walk of a weary king. The desert cools with the fall of night, and the sharp edges of stone soften in the silver glow of moonlight. The pyramids of Dosha, once noisy with labor, now rest in silence. The bent pyramid leans gently into its floor, while the red pyramid gleams calm and steady. Both breathe under the stars, their vast shadows stretching across the sand like blankets. You can imagine the workers long gone, their fires dimmed, their laughter fading into memory. The Nile drifts quietly nearby, its waters carrying the same eternal rhythm it always has. Reeds rustle in the breeze, and a night bird calls faintly. Before settling into stillness, everything slows. Sneferu himself has taken his final steps, his body resting in the cool stone chambers he worried over for so long. Yet his presence lingers in the still air, not heavy, not restless, but softened, like a voice drifting into sleep. The pyramids no longer feel like burdens or mistakes. They are simply there, part of the desert, part of the horizon, part of the slow breathing of history. As you picture them under the night sky, let your own breath match their calm. Inhale slowly, as if drawing in the cool desert air. Exhale gently, as though releasing the weight of stone. Each breath softens the edges of your thoughts, just as the moonlight softens the harsh lines of the pyramids. Now the sand is quiet, the stars are steady, and the pyramids glow faintly in their eternal watch. The story grows quieter, fainter, drifting toward silence. Let the image fade softly in your mind, the stones dissolving into shadow, the desert into stillness, until all that remains is calm.